I never imagined that a quiet evening at home would shift the foundation of everything I thought I knew. It all started so innocently, but what Adrian did next left me questioning everything. Where are you watching from tonight? Tell me in the comments and settle in. This story isn't one you'll forget anytime soon. I suppose I should begin by saying this. I never thought I'd tell anyone this story. Not because I'm ashamed exactly, but because the emotions tangled in it are still raw, still confusing in places. But time has given me the gift of distance, and maybe now I can see it for what it really was. A night that changed me. A moment that once passed, refused to leave quietly. Adrian, my son, had always been the quieter one. My husband Henry was the booming presence in the house. The voice that carried through the halls, the strength in every situation. When we lost him, suddenly without warning, it was like a silence fell over everything. That was 3 years ago now, and for a long time I moved through my days with the practiced rhythm of someone pretending to be okay. Adrian moved back in not long after the funeral. Just until you feel like yourself again, Mom, he had said gently. But I think we both knew the truth. Neither of us was quite ready to be alone. He was in his 30s then, recently single and thoughtful, in a way that sometimes reminded me of Henry in the early years, before life had worn him down, before the stress and long hours carved lines into his brow. That night began like most others. I had just finished folding laundry when Adrian came in from his evening walk. His hair was tousled by the wind, and his jacket was damp from the mist outside. He looked tired, but when he smiled at me, it warmed something in my chest I hadn't felt in a long time. "Smells good in here," he said, glancing at the kitchen where I'd left a casserole warming in the oven. I smiled. "It's just leftovers, but you're welcome to pretend I cooked something special." He laughed softly and toed off his shoes. "With the way today went, I'll take the fantasy." Dinner was quiet, the kind of quiet that feels full, not awkward. He told me about a client at work who'd made his life hell. And I listened, nodding, sometimes laughing where he needed me to. It was comforting how natural it felt to slip into this rhythm with him. Not mother and child exactly, but two adults who had learned to lean on each other. After the dishes were washed and the counters wiped down, I poured us both a glass of wine. Just one. That was our rule. Adrian had always been careful with me, like he didn't want me losing myself in grief the way I almost had after Henry passed. We ended up in the living room as we often did. A throw blanket over both our legs, the low hum of the TV barely audible in the background. I leaned my head on his shoulder without really thinking. I had done it before, but this time he shifted slowly, deliberately, and wrapped his arm around me. It wasn't unusual. He'd done that before too. But the way his hand rested on my upper arm, his thumb gently tracing over the fabric of my sweater, was new, gentle, focused. It sent a quiet ripple through me. One I wasn't ready to admit to. "You okay?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I nodded, then paused. "Yeah, just tired, I think." He turned his head slightly, just enough so his cheek brushed mine. His warmth was steady, and I could feel his breath close. "You don't have to be strong all the time, you know," he said. I wanted to respond, to say something simple like, "I know," or "Thank you," but I couldn't. My throat tightened, not from sadness exactly, but from the sudden awareness that someone saw me again. Not just as a grieving widow or a mother, but as a woman. I let out a slow breath. "I miss being close to someone," I said quietly, unsure if I even meant to say it aloud. Adrian didn't move away. In fact, his arm tightened slightly, and his other hand rested gently on mine where it lay in my lap. "I know," he said simply. "I've missed it too." For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The world outside the window was dark, and still the kind of quiet that invites thoughts you normally push aside. When I finally looked up at him, I caught something in his eyes. Not pity, not discomfort, but something softer and strangely familiar. It was the look Henry used to give me when I said something vulnerable, a mix of love, concern, and a kind of silent understanding. His fingers intertwined with mine slowly. He gave me the chance to pull away, but I didn't. Instead, I leaned in a little more, resting my head fully against his chest this time. I could feel his heartbeat, steady, present. "I'm sorry," I whispered, though I wasn't sure why. Maybe for the years of distance. Maybe for the moment itself. "Don't be," he murmured. "You don't ever have to be sorry for needing comfort." That's what it was, wasn't it? Comfort. Familiarity. Two people who had filled their days with distractions finally sitting in their grief and recognizing it mirrored in each other. His hand brushed a strand of hair from my face, and for a moment my breath caught. I didn't pull back, and neither did he. There was nothing rushed, nothing urgent, just a shared understanding that we were both quietly unraveling something long buried. That night when I went to bed, I lay awake for hours. Not because I was afraid or confused, but because I couldn't stop thinking about how natural it felt, how right it felt to be seen again. And for the first time in years I didn't feel alone. The next morning, the light streaming through my bedroom window seemed softer somehow. I remember lying there still listening to the faint clinks and hums coming from the kitchen downstairs. Adrian was up before me. He always was on Sundays making coffee the way his father used to, careful not to make too much noise. It made me smile without even trying. But beneath that smile there was a quiet storm of thoughts. The memory of the night before was still fresh, not dramatic or wild, but lingering like a half-remembered dream that makes your chest ache with some truth you haven't quite named yet. I finally got up, wrapping my robe tightly around me, more out of habit than modesty. As I made my way down the stairs, I felt an odd nervousness in my stomach. What if it had all been in my head? What if last night was just one of those fleeting moments born from wine and winter loneliness? Adrian was standing at the stove, his back to me, the smell of eggs and butter filling the air. "Morning," I said gently. He glanced back and his face lit up like it always did when he saw me, but there was something different in his eyes. Not hesitation, not regret, just calm, steady. "Hey, Mom. Slept okay?" I nodded as I moved to the counter, fingers wrapping around the hot mug he had already prepared for me. "Yeah, better than usual, actually." He smiled at that, and neither of us said anything for a while. It was a comfortable silence, but it carried the weight of last night in its corners. After breakfast, we found ourselves out in the garden. There wasn't much to tend this time of year, but we often went out there to sip our coffee and feel the air. I stood at the edge of the patio, watching a pair of sparrows fight over a crust left on the railing. Adrian came up behind me and handed me my sweater. "You'll get cold," he said, and when I turned to take it, his hand brushed mine. That touch, that same quiet, careful warmth from the night before. I looked up at him, and he met my gaze without flinching. "About last night," I started, then paused. "You don't have to explain anything," he said gently. "We were just being honest with each other." The words sat in the air between us for a long moment. He was right. We hadn't done anything wrong, but the closeness, the way his hand lingered, the way I didn't move away, it wasn't just comfort. It was something deeper, unspoken, and it terrified me how much I had wanted to stay in that moment. I looked down at my hands. It's just been a long time since I felt connected to someone like that. Adrian moved to stand beside me, his eyes following mine out to the trees beyond the fence. "You don't have to explain that either," he said. I felt it too. The silence, the missing, the way some nights feel heavier than others. I nodded. "It's strange, isn't it? How grief can sit beside you for years like a shadow you just learn to live with." He didn't respond right away. Instead, he reached down and took my hand softly. No pressure, and I let him. My fingers curled into his without even thinking. That night it happened again. The closeness, the quiet conversation over tea, the gentle laughter at some old memory, and finally the shared blanket on the couch, the slow way my head found its place against his chest as though it had always belonged there. I could feel his breath in my hair, steady and calm. I could feel the rhythm of his heartbeat, the way his chest rose and fell beneath me. It wasn't romantic, at least not in the way stories usually paint it. It wasn't passionate or wild or dramatic. It was something else, something more intimate. A slow unraveling of loneliness, a recognition. "Do you ever feel like the house remembers?" I asked him softly. He didn't hesitate all the time. "Sometimes I feel like I still hear your father's voice just in the next room." Adrian helped me a little closer. "Maybe you do. Maybe we both do." We sat like that for a long time. I don't know how long. Long enough for the tea to go cold. Long enough for the moon to rise behind the bare branches outside. Eventually I looked up at him. "Do you think it's strange?" I asked. He tilted his head slightly. "What this? A sitting like this? Talking like this, needing each other the way we do?" His answer was quiet but firm. "No, I think it's real." And it was. That was the hardest part to admit. It wasn't about filling a role. It wasn't about replacing someone who couldn't be replaced. It was about being seen, being known, being needed, not as a mother or a son, but as two people bound by years of shared pain and silent strength. That night, when I got up from the couch, I turned to look back at him one more time. He was watching me, not with desire or confusion, but with something much deeper, something I hadn't seen in a very long time. He whispered my name. Emily. I paused in the hallway, heart fluttering. I'm here, I said. I know, he replied. And not going anywhere. I nodded and turned off the light. The days that followed passed in quiet rhythm like the slow turning of pages in a book I didn't know I was writing. There wasn't a grand change, no dramatic moment where everything suddenly shifted. Instead, it was in the way Adrian looked at me across the table. The way he'd pause a little longer when we said goodnight. The warmth that lingered in our silences. It was subtle, but it was undeniable. Something between us had opened, and once opened, it couldn't be closed. On Tuesday, it rained. One of those soft, steady rains that blurs the world outside the windows. I spent the morning dusting the living room, an excuse to keep my hands busy. Memories seemed to drift in with the sound of the water tapping against the glass. Henry's old chair still sat by the fireplace. I hadn't let anyone move it. It was a relic now, untouched but not forgotten. I found myself standing beside it, fingers grazing the worn leather arm. It used to creak when he leaned back. I could still hear it if I tried. Adrian came in holding 2 mugs of tea. He paused when he saw me there, lost in thought. I used to sit on the floor next to him, he said. He'd rest his hand on my head and call me his little thinker. I turned to look at him, surprised he remembered. His eyes were distant, soft with memory. I don't think I've said his name out loud in months, I whispered. Adrian handed me the tea and nodded. Sometimes it feels easier not to, like saying it out loud makes it more real. I took a sip, the warmth settling in my chest. Do you ever feel guilty? For moving forward, he stepped closer, not quite touching me, but near enough that I could feel his presence. Not anymore, he said, because moving forward doesn't mean forgetting. It just means living, and I think he'd want that for both of us. That night, I didn't go upstairs after dinner. We ended up in the den instead. The one room in the house that never quite lost the scent of Henry's cologne. No matter how many years passed. I curled up on the couch with a blanket pulled tight around me, and Adrian sat beside me, close enough to share warmth but not intruding. The fire crackled in the corner, and outside, the rain began to fall again. I don't remember what started the conversation. Maybe it was the way his fingers found mine under the blanket, or the way my head found its place against his shoulder without hesitation. But we began talking, really talking, about things we had both tipped around, about love, about loneliness, about the nights that stretched long and quiet and made you wonder if anyone would ever truly see you again. And then there was a pause. Not awkward, just full. He turned his body slightly to face me, and I looked up to meet his eyes. The room fell away in that moment. There was only him, only us. He reached up and brushed a strand of hair from my face. His fingers lingered on my cheek, and I leaned into the touch before I could second-guess it. I've been thinking about what you said, he murmured. About missing being close to someone. I nodded slowly, my breath held still. I don't want you to be alone anymore, he continued. Not if you don't have to be. There was no pressure in his voice, no demand, just truth. I don't either, I replied, softer than a whisper. I didn't know who leaned in first. Maybe it was both of us. Maybe it was something in the space between us pulling us together. But suddenly his forehead rested against mine, and I could feel his breath. Slow, steady, waiting. I don't know what this is, I said, my voice trembling slightly. I don't know what we're doing. I don't either, he said, but I know it feels honest and safe. And it did. That was the strange part. Didn't feel wrong. Felt inevitable. I didn't move when he kissed my forehead. I didn't move when his fingers laced with mine again, slower this time. I didn't flinch when he rested his lips softly on my temple and breathed in. There was a depth to it that I hadn't expected. Not lust, not confusion. Something older, deeper. A connection rooted in years of shared life. In understanding each other's pain better than anyone else could. We stayed like that, sitting close, breathing together for what felt like an hour. No words, no explanations. And when I finally stood to go upstairs, Adrian didn't try to stop me. He just looked at me with those steady eyes and said, "Good night, Mom." I paused in the doorway. "Good night, Adrian." But as I walked down the hall, something inside me shifted, a quiet realization settling in my bones. He wasn't trying to replace anyone, and I wasn't looking for a substitute. We were two people who had survived the same storm. And for the first time, we weren't just leaning on each other. We were reaching out together. The next morning, I found a small note by the coffee maker. "Let's take a walk today, just you and me, somewhere quiet," and I smiled. We chose the old trail behind the neighborhood, the one that wound through the woods and opened up near the edge of the lake. It was a place we hadn't walked together in years, not since Henry used to take us there for afternoon picnics. Back then Adrian was a teenager, lanky and quiet, usually more interested in skipping stones than conversation. But now things were different. We were different. The early afternoon sun filtered through the branches, casting dappled shadows on the dirt path. Neither of us spoke much at first. There was something in the stillness, not heavy but expectant, like the world around us understood that we needed this quiet. As we reached the clearing by the lake, Adrian spread the old checkered blanket on the grass, just like his father used to do. I sat beside him, knees tucked beneath me, hands wrapped around the thermos of coffee we brought. The air smelled like pine and distant rain, and the water shimmered with sunlight. He looked at me, then really looked like he was memorizing something. "You look peaceful," he said. I smiled, brushing a wind-blown strand of hair from my face. "I feel peaceful." He nodded. "I haven't seen that look on you in a long time." I hesitated, then said, "That's because I haven't felt it in a long time." The moment hung between us. Then he reached for my hand again, this time with quiet confidence, and I didn't hesitate. Our fingers fit easily now, like it had always been this way. "I think I've been holding my breath for years," I admitted softly, pretending I was okay, pretending I didn't want more. Adrian's thumb brushed across the back of my hand. "You don't have to pretend with me." That afternoon, as we sat side by side watching the water ripple, I felt something settle inside me. Not closure. Henry would always be with me in some way. But a new kind of beginning, one rooted not in denial or escape, but in deep understanding, a beginning born from quiet comfort, and the realization that love doesn't always follow rules or expectations. He turned to me again, his voice gentler than ever. I used to wonder if I'd ever feel close to someone again. Not just physically but truly close, like I could show every part of myself and not be afraid. I looked into his eyes. "Do you still wonder?" He shook his head. "Not anymore." He leaned in then. Not suddenly, not urgently. Just a slow, meaningful gesture that gave me all the space in the world to lean back or stop him. But I didn't. I met him halfway. It was a kiss, a real one, soft, unrushed, tender in a way that made my heart ache and my breath still. And when it ended, I didn't feel shame. I didn't feel confusion. I felt held. Truly, completely held. That evening, back home, we moved around each other in the kitchen as if tethered by something invisible. A shared rhythm, a quiet understanding. When he brushed past me to grab a bowl, his hand lingered at my waist. When I handed him a spoon, our fingers touched a little longer than necessary, but nothing felt forced. Nothing felt wrong. Later we curled up together on the couch just as we had many times before. But this time the weight of the unspoken was gone. This time I rested my head on his chest and placed my hand against his heart, and he wrapped his arms around me like it was the most natural thing in the world. There was no need for words. We had already said everything in the silence. The moon rose quietly outside, casting soft light across the floor. The clock ticked steadily, but for once I didn't dread the passing of time. I felt present, whole. Before drifting off to sleep, I whispered into the space between us. "Do you think people would understand?" He took a breath. "Maybe not, but I don't think we need them to." I nodded, eyes closing. "No, I suppose we don't." In the days that followed, we didn't rush to define it. We didn't label what was happening. We just lived, shared coffee in the mornings, took long walks, cooked together, laughed more, and every time I looked at Adrian, I saw not just the boy I had raised, but the man who had grown beside me through loss and healing, and had chosen to stay when it would have been easier to leave. He hadn't taken over his father's role. He had made a new space, something uniquely his, built on patience, respect, and the kind of connection that only comes when two people have truly seen the worst in life and chosen love anyway. I don't know what the future holds. I don't know if the world would ever understand what grew between us. But I know this. For the first time in a very long time, I feel alive again. And I wouldn't change a thing.